Thank you and welcome to the show this morning. The topic this morning is professional wrestling in the South. And we have with us to talk about professional wrestling in the South, Professor Robert Pickard, a professor at Tennessee State University who has agreed to give us some information relative to the wrestling in the South, but from an historical point of view. And of course, let me welcome you, Professor Pickard, to the show this morning.
Thank you, Dr. Andy. It's always great to be with you.
And to tell you how delighted we are to have you here with us this morning. You've been with us on a number of occasions, and each time you bring us such excellent information, and we anticipate that today. But before we get into dealing with professional wrestling in the South, Professor Pickard, let's have you to give us some information in reference to your background, your education, and some of your experiences that made you interested in the topic that we're dealing with this morning. Then we'll talk about the topic during that second segment.
Right. I was born and raised in Nashville, and I grew up here, went to public schools, to Stokes Elementary, West End High School, and then Hillsborough High School, then to MTSU, and was always interested in history and always interested in politics. I had a kind of a political background. Went to graduate school after MTSU up in Michigan, and then later at George Washington University in Washington, D.C., got my MPA there. And then throughout time, I spent a lot of time out of the area. I was, well, first out of the country. I was in the Peace Corps for 2 years, and then I worked in refugee programs in Asia and Africa. And I did some political work and also continued doing some refugee and development work while I was in Washington. And moved back to Nashville in 1994, worked for the local government here for a number of years. My wife is still working in the local government. And I began teaching part-time at MTSU about 12 years ago, and moved on to, I taught there for 5 years, and I've taught at Tennessee State since 2007, and at Nashville State Community College for 4 years, I believe, since fall, or I think January 2011. Taught at Motlow State for a while as well. So I've taught at several colleges in this area. And I've written a number of op-ed pieces for the Tennessean, as well as some things, some articles for the Tennessee Historical Quarterly. And I'm working on some articles now for the new Encyclopedia of Nashville. It's a brand new online encyclopedia. Wrestling is one of those topics. Popular culture, also politics and foreign policy are all my interests, and international affairs, human rights, civil rights. These are all things that I think, although they sound kind of disparate, I think they come together very well, and they do in this topic of wrestling. When I was a kid, of course, I watched wrestling on television, locally produced wrestling. Nick Goulas was a promoter. And it took me a while to, like most kids, children are usually, young people 10 to 12 years old are usually an audience for wrestling, and I kind of lost interest after a while. But then when I was in college in the 70s, one of my best friends, history major at MTSU, was a professional wrestler named Joe Rossi, who went as Joey Rossi. We favored each other, looked a lot alike. If I'd exercised then like I did now, we could have probably been a tag team because everybody thought it was his brother. And Joey's father was a legend in this area, Lynn Rossi. I wanted him to come with me today, but he unfortunately had some medical things to take care of, so he couldn't be with us today. But he was one of the greats. He's in Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame. Lynn Rossi was what is called in the trade a hooker or a shooter. A hooker or a shooter is somebody who has real wrestling skills. A lot of people who go into wrestling are not wrestlers, but he could wrestle. He could wrestle in the Olympics. He could wrestle in a street match. He could wrestle in what's called a shoot match in wrestling, which is where instead of like something that's scripted or they make up as they go along, they actually are wrestling. And so I would travel a lot with Joe, and I would also, he would get me tickets, free tickets for the Wednesday night show. And so that's how I became interested in wrestling initially, and nobody was writing. And today, you know, at that time, wrestling was kind of seen as kind of low class or entertainment, or how would you say it, lowbrow entertainment. And today it's big business. And we have TNA Wrestling, for example, here in Nashville. It's a national promotion.
And so in a real sense, you bring to us today not only some information in reference to wrestling itself, but the history of it, that,
Yes.
excuse me, that you can put it within the framework and show how significant it was and people who participated in it. And
Right.
those are the kind of things that I know that you have for us today. And so I want to take this first commercial break, and then we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break.